All right. So normally this is the first day of Judges. If you're joining us today, if you hit the subscribe button and then you hit the alarm button, I believe it will show up in your feed and you won't have to hunt for us all the time. We do put each of the studies in a playlist. So we have other playlists. If you'd like to go watch any of those, you may. We hope you enjoyed them as much as we did. If you have prayer requests, we pray before we come to study and start recording. So if you have a prayer request, you can message us. If you know anyone of us personally, just let any one of us know, message the YouTube channel, and we will be happy to include your prayer in the mornings before we start Bible study. Did I miss anything, ladies? Okay, so today we're starting the book of Judges. Normally we just read the introductory things from our commentaries and kind of get a good feel for what Judges is about, what we're supposed to be getting out of it, who the main characters are, and then we'll get into the details of reading it. So we had studied Deuteronomy, and then we went to and that was Moses's last letter to the Israelites, and where he then at the end appointed Joshua to lead them, and then we read all of Joshua and studied that. And so now we at this point we do not have a king. We have not had a king, and now we're getting to the judges, and they are the people that ruled over the tribes. So I guess, Cindy, do you want to start with yours?
Sure.
Okay. So we use three commentaries mainly. We use John MacArthur, Tony Evans, and Warren Worsby, and then we all have different Bibles, so you'll hear us read different versions. And yeah, so sometimes we have extra commentaries that we will add in also. So Cindy's going to start with John MacArthur.
Okay, the book bears the fitting name Judges, which refer to unique leaders God gave to his people for preservation against their enemies. The Hebrew title means, quotes, deliverers or, quotes, saviors, as well as judges. 12 such judges arose before Samuel. Then Eli and Samuel increased the count to 14. God himself is the higher judge.
Okay, so
Judges
there were
spans about
12.
350 years.
What was that? There were
Yes,
12
and then
before
Eli
Samuel.
and Samuel increased it to 14.
Before Samuel, and then Samuel and Eli. So he's saying there was 14 before the book of Judges, because
Yes.
Eli's sons were the ones that were killed, and then he died.
Judges spans about 350 years from Joshua's successful conquest until Eli and Samuel judged, prior to the establishment of the monarchy. The time was earlier than David's capture of Jerusalem, since Jebusites still controlled the site. Also, the writer deals with the time before a king ruled. Since Saul began his reign 1051 BC, a time shortly after his rule began is probably when Judges was written.
Okay, hang on. So Saul began reigning in 1051 BC.
Yes.
Thank you.
Judges is a tragic sequel to Joshua. In Joshua, the people were obedient to God in conquering the land. In Judges, they were disobedient, adulterous, and often defeated. 5 basic reasons are evident for these cycles of Israel's moral and spiritual decline. 1. disobedience toward God in failing to drive the Canaanites out of the land.
Can you
Two.
read these slowly so I can write them down? Disobedience to God and failure to drive
The Canaanites out.
Out of the land.
Canaanites out. Okay.
Number 2 was idolatry. Number 3, intermarriage with wicked Canaanites. Number 4, not obeying the judges. And 5, turning away from God after the death of the judges.
And these are 5 reasons Israel
That contributed to the moral and spiritual decline.
Thank you.
A 4-part sequence repeatedly occurred in this phase of Israel's history. 1, Israel's departure from God. 2, God's chastisement in permitting military defeat and subjugation. 3, Israel's prayer for deliverance. 4, God raising up, quotes, judges. They were either civil or sometimes local military champions who led in shaking off the oppressors.
Boy, I need you to repeat that one.
God raising up, quotes, judges.
Wait, are you saying 5, like F as in Frank, I-V-E?
Civil, civil.
No, the very first word.
God raising up judges.
God, G-O-D.
I swear there's a word before that.
Oh, the other one, number 3, was Israel's prayer for deliverance.
Yeah, I got that.
Okay, so 4, God raising up, quotes, judges, either civil or sometimes local military champions
okay.
who led in shaking off the oppressors.
Who led chasing off the oppressors.
Yes.
Thank you.
14 judges arose, 6 of them military judges. Othniel, Ehud, Deborah, Gideon, Jephthah, and Samson.
So we started out with 14. We had 12 before Samuel, then Samuel and Eli made 14, and now there's 14 more.
No, it's these existing 14.
Okay.
What I'm interpreting,
So 6 were military judges. What were their names again? May need to spell them.
okay, first one, capital Othnniel,
Okay. Daniel.
capital Ehud,
Ehud.
Deborah,
Love her.
Gideon, Jephthah, capital Jephthah, and Samson.
And these
2
6
men
are,
were,
these
pardon
are
me?
6, what?
They were military judges.
Okay, thank you.
2 men were of special significance for a contrast with spiritual leadership. 1, Eli, judge and high priest, parentheses, not a good example. And 2, Samuel, judge, priest, and prophet, parentheses, a good example.
Okay, so Eli, judge and high priest, not good example. I'm running out of room already. And then Samuel,
Judge, priest, and prophet, a good example.
high priest.
Just
No,
says priest.
He was just a priest. Okay. Judge, priest, and
Prophet.
prophet.
Judges is thematic rather than chronological. Now you're going to find as I'm reading this, I highlighted. I actually prepared ahead of time.
Thank you.
And I highlighted. So I'm not reading verbatim everything.
Okay.
God's power to rescue shines brightly against the dark backdrop of pitiful human compromise and sometimes bizarre twists of sin, as in the final summary. The last verse, 21-25, sums up the account. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Interpretive challenges. The most stimulating challenges are 1, how to view men's violent acts against enemies or fellow countrymen, whether with God's approval or not.
Sounds like today, doesn't it?
Yes.
Maybe that's why God has us here.
2, God's use of leaders who at times do his will and at times follow their own sinful impulses. And puts in parentheses
Trump.
Gideon, Eli, Jephthah, and Samson. So they weren't good. 3, how to view Jephthah's vow and offering of his daughter. and 4, how to resolve God's sovereign will with his providential working in spite of human sin.
Those are the challenges. Interpretive
Challenges and how to view judges.
It does make it hard because you're like, wait, I thought he was a good guy. Now he's doing something stupid.
The chronology of the various judges in different sectors of the land raises questions about how much time passed and how the time totals can fit into the entire time span from the Exodus to Solomon's 4th year, which is said to be 480 years. A reasonable explanation is that the deliverances and years of rest under the judges in distinct parts of the land included overlaps, so that some of them did not run consecutively, but rather concurrently during the 480 years. Paul's estimate of about 450 years in Acts 13:20 is an approximation.
What was that approximation for again?
How long the judges ruled.
Okay. And Paul said in where? Acts.
In Acts 13:20, he approximated it at 450 years. Regardless, it's a long time.
Yeah.
And that's it for the overview.
There was something you said about how we read it, not to read it like chronologically, but he said something else. Like
It's thematic.
Okay, Judges written thematically.
Is it chromatic or
It's thematic rather than
Okay.
chronological.
thematic? Okay,
Thematic.
gotcha.
So I guess it's not necessarily written in the order that things happen, but perhaps common
About the
themes.
subject. Yeah.
Yeah.
Events.
Yeah.
Well, my Bible has an interest, talks about a little bit differently. It's just an introduction, but it's kind of interesting without reading the whole thing. Basically said what she said. So it says so after the failure to eliminate the enemy completely from the land, the intermarriage and all the idolatry and falling away, it says out of their desperation, they begged God to rescue them. In faithfulness, this focuses a lot on God's forgiveness and faithfulness to his promise, and out of his loving kindness, God would raise up a judge to deliver his people, and for a time there would be peace. Then complacency and disobedience set in, and the cycle begins again. Over a period of
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I thought you were done.
Over a period of 325 years, there are 6 successive periods of oppression and deliverance. And it talks about the careers of the 12 deliverers, as Cindy said. The captors include the Mesopotamians, the Moabites, the Philistines, the Canaanites, the Benjamites, and the Ammonites. A variety of deliverers, from Othniel to Samson, were used by God. God's deliverance through the judges is a powerful demonstration of his love and mercy towards his people. And then as you read through the book of Judges, take a good look at these heroes from Jewish history. Take note of their dependence on God and obedience to his commands. Observe Israel's repeated downward spiral into sin, refusing to learn from history and living only for the moment. But most of all, stand in awe of God's mercy as he delivers his people over and over again.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because so my one Bible, it says the cyclical pattern of people's sin and God's rescue is a steady refrain throughout the book. So I feel like the whole Bible's like that. Like it's this ongoing thing. God saves us, we do well, we sin. God saves us, we do well, we sin. God say, it's like this ongoing thing. I love how the Message introduces this. He says,
But
go ahead.
oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, what that brings to my mind, I wonder if there's any kind of publication or acknowledgement of, after the Bible, are there certain phases or cycles of repeated, peace and then turmoil and peace and turmoil that we don't even, we're not even putting God in our minds over the years, over all these years, did we not acknowledge God's presence in it? But that if we look at it from a biblical perspective, we could see it. You know what I'm saying? It's between the Bible and the present. That span are these cycles, they continue, but what are the specific cycles? Like what were they? What were these events?
Oh, you mean identifiers?
Were they also, yeah, was it also thematic, as as Cindy said? What are these themes throughout our history between the Bible and now, these cycles that we may have missed and really didn't see it in a
biblical view.
Biblical perspective? Yes.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
I don't know. That just came to my mind, and I'm just wondering.
I think it's harder and harder because we have access to so much information that things that look legit and real to us aren't. For instance, I'm going to use clever wording here because it's a hot topic. For instance, with Hitler and what he did, the focus in history is totally on what he did. And I agree, it was horrible, awful what he did. But what we don't hear about is how we went in and we killed all these Germans who were Protestant praying Christians at the same time. We did that, but we don't learn that in our history. You know what I mean? So I feel like we have such access, and the indoctrination of what we're taught, like I don't even know we could identify it. And I also think about when, like when we were in, was it Deuteronomy? And God said, or maybe it's Joshua, and God said, I'm not giving you the Canaanites and all this land because you're so good. I'm giving it to you because they're so bad.
Yeah.
That like reframed how I saw things because I was like, wow, it's because they're so, I'm bad.
That's good.
I'm not, he's not like, when we think about like, oh, we're not, we're dirty rags too.
Well, and I think part of it would be understanding it says the captors include the Mesopotamians, the Moabites, the Philistines, the Canaanites, the Midianites, and the Ammonites. What are our captors of today? And who are our deliverers? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting what Eugene Peterson writes here. He says, sex and violence, rape and massacre, brutality and deceit do not seem to be conjugal materials in use for developing a story of salvation. So apparently all this was going on at that time. Given the Bible's subject matter, God and salvation, living well and loving deeply, we quite naturally expect to find its pages. We quite naturally expect to find in its pages leaders for us who are good, noble, and honorable men and women showing us the way. That's what we would expect. So it's always something of a shock to enter the pages of the book of Judges and find ourselves immersed in nearly unrelieved mayhem. I feel like that's where we are today. It might not gravel our sensibilities so much if these flawed and reprobate leaders were held up as negative moral examples with lurid hellfire descriptions of the punishing consequences of living such bad lives. But the story is not quite told that way. There is a kind of matter-of-fact indifference in the tone of the narration, almost as if God is saying, well, if this is all you're going to give me to work with, I'll use these men and women. I love that. Just as they are, and get on with working out the story of salvation. These people are even given a measure of dignity as they find their place in the story. They are most certainly not employed for the sake of vilification or lampoon. God, it turns out, does not require good people in order to do good work. He can and does work with us in whatever moral, spiritual condition he finds us. God, we are learning, does some of his best work using the most unlikely people. If God found a way to significantly include these leaders, the judges, in what we know is on its way to becoming a glorious conclusion, he certainly can use us with our sometimes impossible friends and neighbors. Twice in Judges, chapter 17, verse 6, and 21, verse 25, there is the telling refrain, quote, at that time, there was no king in Israel. People did whatever they felt like doing. I think Cindy read that. But we readers know that there was a king in Israel. God was king. And so while the lack of an earthly king accounts for the moral and political anarchy, the presence of the sovereign God, however obscurely realized, means that the reality of the kingdom is never in doubt. I think this is so encouraging for us today. Like, I have goosebumps.
It is, and then, that what just struck me is God was the king the whole time, not just when they were at peace. I mean, he basically, these people just went rampant under his authority. Not that he
And
commanded it,
still ongoing today. Still ongoing today.
yeah. And it's like he's just waiting for them to break, like to break themselves, and then call out to him, like, and that's, is that why he just lets everybody go so rampant? He hates it. He hates all that sin, but yet, that's what his people were doing, and he's reigning the whole time.
Yeah, my Bible says a little bit more. It's important to study this book in the right way. If we look to these leaders as role models, we'll be disappointed. The judges were creatures of their time who treated women as possessions and settled problems with angry outbursts of violence. These are stories of people surviving in a primitive time, struggling to understand God, themselves, and forgiveness. They act out in dramatic and childish ways, and their rebellion against God looks a lot like our own. We find commonality with these characters by asking ourselves, what would happen if I gave full rein to every passion I've ever had? The judges through whom God saves Israel, they are fallen creatures. And these are just the sort of people God works through.
I love that.
I do too.
Yeah, you said in the beginning, if we look to humans as, what did you say? If we look to humans as,
If we look to these leaders as role models, we will be disappointed.
I think we deal with that today too. Like, we put people on pedestals, and then when they fall, we're like shocked. It's like they're humans.
There's a thing in my Bible that says Judges is a book about heroes, 12 men and women who delivered Israel from her oppressors. These judges were not perfect. In fact, they included an assassin, a sexually promiscuous man, and a person who broke all the laws of hospitality, but they were submissive to God and God used them.
I was thinking like,
That's key. They were submissive to God.
And God used them.
even though they made
That's-
mistakes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I was trying to think, was it Jacob when I studied in Genesis? Like one of them was like, yeah, I thought it was in Jacob, like the liar, and it was like, well, why would he pick him? And it was like because he had the umpha that God needed. Like his brother was like didn't want to do anything. Would have been the one logical that you would have picked, but God picked Jacob because Jacob at least had a little bit of spitfire in him, and God could use him. And that's kind of reminding me like what he's saying here is like, you know, all these judges, like even though they were screwing up, at least they were doing something and I could use them.
Well,
I
it's kind of a
follow,
dichotomy that what they were doing, but then they were submissive. So I'm
Yeah.
trying to wrap my head around that.
Well, I think
I-
it's the sin nature. It's like, even though their sin nature was evident and present, just as ours is. I mean, you know, we give into that sin nature, but we still try to be submissive.
I love that. I'm
God
writing
and-
that down. Even if submissive, they still have a sin nature.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good, Kim. It kind of sounds like everything's fallen apart after Moses and Joshua, you know?
Well, you think about like Moses and Joshua, like they were military, they were with a purpose, they were obedient, they were trained, and then it's good for a while and everybody gets lazy and we kind of let things happen. And then we get into a place where like, oh, you know, holy smokes, we gotta get our act together. And, you know, we've kind of gotten soft. And I feel like God's putting us in Judges for this time. Like, honestly, it sounds like it's going to be an amazing book.
it's
It
when
does.
he humbles us, that's when we come back to him, even
Mhm.
like you said, we get into a lull and not, but when we're humbled, even though we follow, you can be born again or even, the lost, they get humbled, then that's when they know who is in control.
That's a good
I
point.
I follow someone on one of the platforms and gotquestions.org.
Mhm.
I love looking up like Bible scriptures and then it gives sort of like a coordinates. And the practical application says disobedience always brings judgment. Of course, then it brings us to humbling, humble ourselves to him. The Israelites present a perfect example of what we are not to do. Instead of learning from experience that God will always punish rebellion against him, they continue to disobey and suffer God's displeasure and discipline. If we continue in disobedience, we invite God's discipline, not because he enjoys our suffering, but because the Lord disciplines those he loves, and he punishes everyone he accepts as a son, which is Hebrews 12:6. The book of Judges is a testament of God's faithfulness. Even if we are faithless, he will remain faithful, 2 Timothy 2:13. Though we may be unfaithful to him as the Israelites were, still he is faithful to us to save us and preserve us, 1 Thessalonians 5:24, and to forgive us when we seek forgiveness, 1 John 1:9. He will keep you strong in the end to the end, so that you will be blameless on the day of the Lord Jesus Christ. God, who has called you into fellowship with his son, Jesus Christ, our Lord, is faithful. 1 Corinthians 1:8-9.
All right, we are actually a couple minutes over. Kathy, do you want to just do a glance through Wordsby and I'll do a glance through Tony to see if there's anything different we'll do first thing in the morning before we start?
Yeah,
the
that's fine.
study? Okay, and then we'll start the study of Judges Tomorrow morning. All right, ladies, if there's nothing else, this concludes the reading of God's word for today. Don't forget to pray for Lori and Ken, because I forgot to pray for them in the beginning as they're traveling and having a good time, hopefully.
They are.
Yay. All right, love y'all.